Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, and best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to learn how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brad Hairston with Blue Prism. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, I'm happy to have as my guest, Jet Theuerkauf, Chief Customer Strategy and Transformation Officer at Blue Prism. Jet and I will be discussing the importance of intelligent automation as a catalyst for transformational change in most companies. Welcome, Jet. Why don't you tell our listeners more about yourself?
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me and really looking forward to this, and welcome everybody who's listening. So I think I'm really blessed. Look, I have a very unique position in this company and probably in a lot of the companies that do software and participate in the space that we're in. So as Chief Customer Strategy and Transformation Officer, my role really is to look down the road, that third and fourth curve, and to really think about what is it that our customers are really going to need in the future. And that future sometimes actually is with us right now, and that extension from now to some point in time down the road. And so it's really a unique position for us because it requires a lot of research, a lot of listening. And it's not just about robotics and the current state of automation, but it's the things that we can see that are going to come in from ancillary technologies and ancillary thinking as well around methodologies and the way that things are working in the world. It also has to think about other economic features, functions, and influences that are going on, such as labor availability and labor shortages. It has to do with other factors that may even involve climate. So there's a number of variables that we're researching and taking in and contemplating as we form hypotheses. And then those hypotheses begin to form objectives for the kinds of products that we're going to develop and those that we have under development right now, as well as our current state evolvement of methodologies like our ROM platform that we're very famous for here at Blue Prism.
You have one of the more interesting C-level titles in a technology company, Chief Customer Strategy and Transformation Officer. Can you perhaps expand on that a little bit more and tell us how it relates to Blue Prism's strategy?
Sure. I think it was a very unique timing when I started the CSXO role, because when we started that role, I had just moved out of the 2 years that I've been the Chief Customer Officer. And if you think about a typical CCO role, your job is to develop and manage the services that you have in place that are there to promote and take care of your customers as they're implementing and learning how to maximize and optimize the technology and the services that you have available to them for any software that you may purchase. For us, it's RPA. And so as we're selling that technology to them, it's how do we make sure that they're getting good experiences when they're using that software, when they're getting started? How do you make sure that as they move through the maturation model that we have in our robotic operating model, or better known as ROM, how do you make sure that they are achieving the things that we've seen others achieve through the benchmarking that we do in the timely way that we think that most companies can move through this and help them avoid the pitfalls that we can? And that's really what the customer office is set there to do. If you look at the difference, though, what my team does, it's really the future. It's really taking those customers, and it's a very small segment today that have been on that journey for a long period of time. They've established an extreme level of capability. They're very good at automation. They're very good in the utilization of a true digital labor force. And now what they're asking is, how do I use a digital labor force to really rethink how work gets done in my company? I'm not interested in just automating tasks. I'm not interested in just automating sub processes, or maybe I'm not even interested in just automating a process, a whole process. What I'm really interested in doing is, how do I rethink work? Because all of our work was built because we had carbon-based workers. We didn't have silicon-based workers. And for these organizations now that understand what a silicon-based worker can do, they can step back for a moment and truly reimagine, I've got a payment process. First off, let me start with, why do I need a payment process? Why is it the way I'm doing payments today need to exist in its current form? Why does that process have to be that way if I have a digital silicon-based workforce? What could that digital workforce do? And what do I really want my carbon-based human workers doing? And that's really what my team's there to do, is really help the organizations that are really sitting there on that precipice, who have established great capability, but now we're asking those kinds of questions, very, very different types of questions. And so we've formed this advisory team now. People are very experienced. All the people on our team have years of experience. They actually were leaders in major organizations around the world who have been former automation transformation leaders. And so they're used to having conversations at the C-suite. Their bosses were C-suite members. They're used to having these problems and these kind of queries themselves. And so they're very comfortable at being in the same shoes as these individuals that we're talking to, because they had the same questions themselves. And that's why it's such a great partnership and a marriage between the current customer office, because they can help mature our customers up to that point. And then we can pick them up when we've got those customers that are just below the transformation level. They're still trying to scale up. And we can help them get to that scaling point and move them up to transform. And then those that are already above transform, of course, they naturally are ready for us. And we're already having conversations. And with the likes of HSBC is a good example of that. And I just learned today as an example, Brad, we have another bank that's asked us to come in the Middle East, and they're interested in having that same kind of conversation.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Really, really interesting. So Jet, let's take a step back and just talk about the RPA space in general. Clearly, it has evolved from a automation kind of point solution to now what can be transformational, a transformational platform. What has enabled that evolution, in your opinion?
Brad, when I was at Bank North Mellon and we drew a diagram, I still remember my head of the COE, Mark Shivers, and I got together and I said, if we could only make these things more like a human. And so we started diagrammatically writing down what were the capabilities of a human at work. And we looked at it from almost a sensory perspective and said, there's vision, so they would need eyes. And then there's ears because they need to hear. And then they have a mouth because they have to talk. And then there's a left brain scenario because they have to be able to think very logically and orderly. And then there's a right brain. So there's more of that softer, empathetic side of things. So we literally started diagrammatically thinking about what human characteristics do people bring to work. And then we said, what technology were available in 2014, 15 in that era? And you just started seeing some of the early beginning technologies that were available back then. And there weren't many, there were some. And we started using some of those things. So we went out and we got an OCR engine, and we had some guys that were really good at the early day machine learning. So we got some Hadoop and R guys, and they started writing, in Python. And so we started writing algorithms to help bring in some decisioning things. And so we started making smarter bots. And so instead of just doing hands-on keyboard rote stuff, we actually started making some robots that were probably high school graduate level, and they could actually start doing higher level, more complex work. Now it's just completely different. I mean, the game is totally changing. I can't even imagine what the end of this year is going to look like, and next year and so on, because the technology around IA and AI and the ease by which you can incorporate through APIs, the way that we're building things more now with container technologies and microservices, you just plug and play whatever you need to make your digital worker fit the situation that you need to have it fit. So if you need somebody who's a high school graduate with that type of intellect, if you will, or those type of characteristics, It's not a problem. Now it's more of which one do you choose for any of these things? You need vision capability. What do you want? You've got Google Vision. You've got all these other capabilities. You need a chat. Well, there's oodles and oodles of chat capabilities. And now it's actually interesting when we have conversations with customers, they're repeating back to us as well. We have, unfortunately, one division's bought like this one, the other division bought this one. They have too many of these things. So they're looking to try to sort out which one's the best one. And, and sometimes it is the matter of, in certain situations, these like type of technologies based on the categories, their purpose fit. So you do need to make sure that sometimes you get the right tool for the situation you're trying to solve the problems for, or you need that digital worker to be a really good accountant type digital worker. Okay, there's other technologies that are specifically built. But again, the beauty of them is, especially with Blue Prism, it's so much easier to incorporate those other skills and capabilities in. Again, so much different than what it was even 3, 4, 5 years ago when I was using the technology.
You mentioned earlier the importance of viewing digital workers as coworkers, an alternative labor source, and that the companies that are really moving forward into more transformation, that's how they look at RPA. Unfortunately, many companies still view RPA as just another technology. Why do you think that is?
I think it's just maturity, Brad, in all honesty. I think they'll all get there. You still need more and more lighthouse cases. You're going to need more and more of these organizations that, their COOs and CTOs and COs and such, they'll be out there talking about this, just like we did in offshoring and outsourcing. The early runners, their voices weren't magnified enough or amplified enough for most people to pay attention. But then over time, as more and more people went, if you weren't using that alternative labor force in some other location, you were left behind, and your CFOs were beginning to look at you going, why are we paying those kind of rates when you've got super talented people in other parts of the world? And again, my hypothesis is, having been very heavily involved in the early days in offshoring and outsourcing, that we're going to see the same kind of phenomena. We're already seeing the parallelisms between the two. And again, we're so early in this true transformative stage, as you mentioned, of these companies who've come to terms with, they've gotten the religion, if you will, that, wait a minute, this isn't just a tool. If we build these things correctly and we really look at them as an alternative labor force, we're having a hard time hiring people. We can't hardly find them.
Right.
We're already doing offshoring and outsourcing. Oh, by the way, we don't even think of it as offshoring anymore. It's just part of our company. So we don't even think of it anymore. That's not helping us because they're having a hard time hiring people. So we're having declining birth rates. So it's going to even get worse over time. We've got to find a different way of working. And so, again, I think it's just a matter of time. I think it's just going to be one of those things that the waves will start building. People will hear things. There'll be more articles written. People will go to conferences, just like it happened with the offshoring days. I think the speed by which, though, will actually come faster than it did for the offshoring.
Do you think that at some point, most companies will just view automation as the way of modern business? Is that a way to look at it, in your opinion?
I think they already are looking at automation that way. I think the difference is just what you asked before. It'll move from being, well, we do automation. Yeah,
Right.
You do automation, right? Do you have an alternative labor force that happens to be silicon based? Because you can have a whole lot of tools and they're all sporadically used because they're just individual spot tactical solutions. But have you actually built a digital based labor force, true robotic labor force, that you could actually program them to be on demand, go over there and do that work, on demand, go over and do that work? It doesn't matter. You can load them up with models and they can be an accountant for 4 hours and a legal person for doing these tasks for another. And that way you have your humans doing exactly what they're built to do, exactly what you want to do. And more importantly, you have your people enjoying and doing the work that they want to do, what your customers want the people doing, and let the digital workers do what they're really good at doing.
Jet, let's talk about the way that companies are driving automation within their organization. Many of them, as you know, have a center of excellence that is leading the charge. They're identifying opportunities. They're there to help own and make sure automation opportunities are addressed the right way. Do you think that the automation team in many companies is too isolated and not really integrated enough in the other parts of the company the way they should be?
I was blessed, at Boney, and I think we had an awesome model because we had dedicated teams. Even though it was in a centralized model, we would consider it a hybrid federation where we had a central team that was owned by the COO, and yet we dedicated really high caliber specialists into every business unit that we worked with. And so they sat with the business units. They got to know people in the business units. They went to management meetings. They just were part of the teams. And so we became a piece of the fabric. We basically became the guys that are men and women that worked for me were all just part of either operations and finance and accounting and shared services and HR. And so that really worked well because they heard all the water cooler conversations. They knew what the problems were. When they got called in to work on something or somebody had hey, I wonder if we could build an automation. All of our robots were named after our founder, Alexander Hamilton. And they'd always, the really advanced organizations would ask, I wonder if Alex could do that. Mm-hmm. And being a part of an organization, having the business leaders and the developers actually a part of the organization, to me was really key. We were developing automations in 30 and 45 days on average. We had extremely high run rate returns on an annual basis. All of those things, I think, were really predicated off the fact that we worked hand in hand with the business units. The people were involved at the business units. It was all business led. It was governed by IT. We had a great relationship with IT. And I think that's what deployments actually work. Not that you can't do it if you have your IT department doing everything. I think you just want to try to eliminate as many barriers to being as close as you possibly can to where the work is actually being done. That's really, really the key. And I think when you can remove as many barriers from that, it increases the velocity by which you're going to get work done. And it eliminates the handoffs for that to happen. And that's really key when you're trying to be agile in your response to, I've got a problem, or I think I've got an opportunity. I'm working with a huge customer right now, and they have both a velocity problem and they have a cost problem with their automation team. And part of it is scale. We already know that. They've built a great factory, but the factory's built to deliver Ferraris. Right now, a Ferrari out the door would cost them a lot of money. Instead of building Ferraris at a pretty rapid pace that would be economically viable for their internal customers. So it's a scale problem, but it's also a velocity problem. It takes way too long to get these things out the door, no matter how many they put through the process. There's different kinds of things that I see when I'm working with customers. And again, sometimes it's just the way they set up themselves because it makes sense on paper. But when you actually go into practice, you realize they're too far away from their constituents. They have too many different handoff points in this to get this stuff done. It may say agile in their methodology, but it's really not agile. And so again, it's lessons learned that I think, and the more we can help those folks. And again, we have the best practices. We have over 2,000 customers, so we have lots of lessons learned. So it's up to us. It's up to our professional services. Our customer success people are fantastic, and they can help customers like that.
If the company's doing an ERP initiative, if they're doing a CRM initiative, whatever is going on, it sounds like you would recommend some automation people from that centralized team being placed on those various initiatives. Is that fair?
Yeah, and we did that exactly. I think in the olden days, what people believed was, oh gosh, if you're doing a big platform change or platform install, wait till you get it all put in bed there, bedded in, and then bring the automation guys in later so that you can figure out where do you still have your touch points. That'll work, no problem. It will work. It's also interesting because one of the things that we learned at Bangor Mel with one of the installs of one of our big platforms was you can actually aid in the install of those big ERP type platforms because that lags time is when they start trying to do uploads of data, as an example, off of old systems.
Mhm.
Those can be very manually oriented and driven, where a digital worker can make it so much faster to do that. And so again, I think this is where you'll see the need for automation and the way that people view automation and the sequence by which you want to bring automation in after we bring in the new platform. The other thing I would suggest is, and we've seen cases of this and it's written about quite a bit in the press, where organizations want to bring in this new shiny object. It's going to solve all of our problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they actually, you've seen organizations now take more of an automation approach where they've said, you know what, the old system still runs. It's our data source. It's the golden source for them. The reason they want to switch up is because this new fancy platform really has all the automation in one box. Actually, they have automation kits all over the place, but they've never looked at, well, how do you optimize those individual kits together into one solution that actually maximizes your original data sources that you have? And any of us that have been around those old IBM 3200 machines, they will run forever. They're just big data sources. They're not good to interface with you, but if you can get the in-between layer, the automation platforms, they're fantastic. So we've seen customers that said, I'm not going to bring in this big brand new shiny thing. I'm going to use my automation systems that I already own. And you'll see Blue Prism in that mix as well. And I'm going to maximize creating a solution out of these individual tools and create a smarter solution that way, and use that as my optimizer to the original set of old clunky systems that I have. And quite honestly, it turns out to be a much more efficient solution for them as well.
Yep. Are you suggesting that people coming out of college today don't know how to program on IBM 3200 mainframes?
Actually, I did hear a funny story. There was somebody saying there, and we were talking to a customer. They said, we're trying to hire COBOL people. And I said,
yeah, put me in that camp too. COBOL 2, actually. But
well, you're the advanced
I was
guy,
sophisticated.
You're
Yeah,
the
exactly.
advanced guy. Yeah.
Jet, is change management a missing element in many intelligent automation programs?
Again, I think when we get to the transform stage, one of the things that we're building into our new methodology, we're actually building a change program into the methodology itself. It's one of the things that was missing in the original ROM program. And when we go back to build the new version of the original ROM that will be used for new customers, we're going to put a change element in that. Actually, we talk about change management, but we're actually going to put in a starter kit in case, and most companies have it, but just in case, and it'll be more of a checklist. Just make sure you have all this stuff. And if you don't, by the way, here's a starter kit that you can use. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen people forget things like, what's your education program that you're going to have to teach people about what are robots? What do they do? What aren't they? What's your comms plan for announcing things? What do you mean? It's just software. Yeah. Okay. But remember, this stuff is scary to people. Technology is just scary to people. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It is. It means something is going to change. And we as human beings, we all talk about, I love change. And really? Because we're creatures of habits, that's just what we are. So absolutely couldn't agree more. It's one of the things we talk about a lot with our customers about, and especially with this new ROM for Transformation program. Out of our 10-week program, we probably have 2 weeks dedicated to that alone. And so just making sure that it's in place, how we're doing it, how the organization is going to run that. Because again, I've seen more of these things fail miserably just because they didn't manage it and dedicate people, time, and resources to the whole approach of understanding. It's not just about the organizational change management. It's about the people change management, because there's two parts of change management. There's the people and the organizational side of this, which is very key.
Jet, you've spent the last 18 months working on a very strategic initiative at Blue Prism called Project X. That's little e, big X. The E stands for enterprise. The X stands for transformation. Let me ask you, Is process reengineering and reimagining work essential to enterprise transformation?
Yeah, I don't know if you're really going to do what we call big T transformation. I don't know how you do it without it. We hear
Yeah.
people talk about, oh, yes, we're in a transformation program. I've been doing transformation for almost 30 years, from the US to the UK and Europe, Russia, New Zealand. And I would tell you that in almost every case, what they told me on my hiring remit was that they wanted big T transformation, actually turned out to be little T transformation. There may have been one or two cases that they really were striving towards big T transformation. But most of the time, they didn't have what we call there's 3 or 4 factors that make a really good organization and their characteristics you look for in the leader. And one of those characteristics is tenacity. So they didn't have the tenacity to stay with it long enough to make it actually big T transformation. And you need that because reimagining how you're doing work is very hard. You literally are going to have to be okay with putting things down on paper, if you will, even if it's digital paper, and saying, wow, we've got an ugly baby. It's a non-blame environment. That's the way this whole massive process has evolved over time. And it is ugly. And you got to be okay with that as the business owner, as the COO or CEO or CEO. You just got to be okay with that. And you got to be okay with saying, okay, we got to be smart enough to be able to figure out a heck of a lot better way of doing this. And then the big question comes, are we okay with doing a clean sheet approach, a greenfield approach?
Yeah.
Because that's a massive heavy lift. And you're talking about probably 6 months of true rematch, because you're literally saying, especially with today's day and age, especially with what we're saying about our Blue Prism Transform program, we're going to start with, guess what? You've got a silicon-based workforce now. You got all this amazing technology around you. What do you really want your people doing in this delivery chain? What do you want them doing? I really only want them working on this part. Okay, great. Great. So everything else, we've got to figure out a digital solution for, right? Because we only really want your people working on that part. And oh, by the way, guess what? That's the only part they want to work on. And oh, by the way, based on the customer journey interviews, that's the only part the customers want them working on. Because if you put them up here, customers complain that they're too slow. So I just don't know another way for a customer experience to be delivered in a true big T transformation way without having that kind of an approach where you're truly going to allow your organization to say, okay, we can't do this way anymore. We can't.
Right.
I've spent years and years out of GE and built reengineering programs and have multiple certificates and color belts and all that stuff. You don't quite get there when you're reengineering, because reengineering, what you're basically doing is you're accepting the existence of the current process and you're doing everything you can to optimize the current way that process works. Transformation truly means I am going to be accepting of the fact that the old ain't good enough anymore. In some places, you might have to just do that because it is faster, it is less expensive, and it may be okay for the commercials because the customers, what you get out of that may be just fine for the customers, and that may be what they're willing to pay for. So there are these kind of things when you're in a transformational leadership role. That's why you don't say, oh, we got to transform everything. You can't, because you may not get paid for it, and it may cause too much risk. And I can definitely tell you, your organization can't stand that much disruption to do a complete transformation of everything. It just won't.
Right. I assume when you're coaching customers through this, you're in a sense getting them to think like a startup where they're taking away constraints. It's really a whole new approach, a whole new mindset.
Yeah, we use this approach called zero-based design. And zero-based design is also based off of another approach called constraint theory. And constraint theory basically has this whole idea, which you and I have actually talked about before with some of our external colleagues from some of our big advisory firms, again, where you're absolutely right. You've got to leave any of the constraints that we as humans always like to bring in, like, oh, well, you can't do that because, and then you start your list.
Right.
We have this regulation, or this system doesn't allow us to do that, or we have a policy in the company. And so you automatically start putting up the reasons why we can't do something. Well, in zero-based design, the whole idea is we don't have those constraints when we start. We're bringing the constraints in later. It's not that we don't acknowledge. We're not going to do this in an impractical way. We're not going to do this in a way that doesn't have common sense applied to it. But what we are going to do is we're going to start with the best we could be. The best that we could ever be would look like that. Okay, now, what are the legitimate constraints? And when you do that, the way that works is you have somebody that literally almost think of it as you're having a mock court. And Brad comes in and says, we have to do this because of the policy. Really, Brad? Show me the policy. It's the first thing you always ask. Actually, show me the policy. No, if you say there's a policy, show me the policy. Show me the regulation. And having done this a number of times, I can tell you that there's a lot of corporate and urban myths that have been built into companies over the years. Because, and again,
Right.
it's not a blame situation. These people have learned these things from the people that taught them.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the ones that are actually legitimate constraints. And that doesn't necessarily mean, even if you find a legitimate one, it doesn't mean that you don't challenge it. Because if the output, if this new design brings more benefits than what you would get if you left the old design in place, then you do have a right to actually challenge. And that's why you need the senior sponsorship and all the things that you normally need when you do these kind of things. But yeah, the constraint theory approach is one that's super important when you're going with the zero-based design mentality.
Excellent. Just the essence of what you guys are doing with Project X is really interesting and fascinating. Jet, I know that Project X has a core foundational tenet, which is creating automation that is responsible and sustainable. Really great stuff. I also know that there's a technology component to what your team is building, something that is going to allow companies to manage inbound work on a real-time basis and send it to the most appropriate fulfillment resource. Anything you want to add to that, just as a teaser of things to come with the Blue Prism platform?
Well, I do want to touch on two things, Brad. You did talk about something that's near and dear, and it is a personal value of mine for the company, and something that I actually believe in that we should be putting as a hallmark for us as a company, because I don't hear anybody else talking about it. And it is around responsible and almost ethical, but sustainable automation. And what we mean by that is, and we're working with companies and outside firms to help us build this into the platform, which is really the approach that when an organization identifies automation opportunities and it does impact people, one of the things that organizations are already and very mindful of is, look, they're having a hard time finding humans to do the work they want humans to do. Right. So why would you jettison humans from one role when you can repurpose them to do work somewhere else? And so we're building in capability to assess roles in organizations that can be automated and put people in different roles and understand what the gap is for them to be able to fill those new roles. We're already able to do that now. And in another year, we're going to be able to link them to the actual training programs automatically and be able to, for those organizations to sign those people up already through different training programs that they may have internally to their organizations or externally through training providers. So today we're actually able to say, look, in this particular division, here's all the things that we could automate. Here's the roles that would be impacted. Here's the gap between people for all these other jobs in the future you're going to need to fill. And here's the capabilities that they're going to need, right? So we can already do that. To me, that closes a loop. That's a complete closed loop now, and makes us a very sustainable, ethical, and just a responsible automation company. So we're helping companies find the kind of work that they should be having digital workers do. And we're helping the organizations as well find the places where humans can actually go back and actually provide value and work that they want to be doing. And I think that's super important because look, forget about the esoteric and makes Jet feel good and it's a good thing to do. It's also important for the organizations because if you let them go, they're not going to get them back. Try again, it's very difficult to hire people. It's only going to get more difficult. So we actually want to help those organizations provide a more economical way for them to be more future-proof. And so that's important. And then the second thing you talked about, our big technology leap that we're building now, which is the Blue Prism operating system. And it's one of the coolest things that Blue Prism has done in a long time. And it does so many different things. You talked about the orchestration component of being able to actually see and simulate and plan and manage incoming work to make sure it provides multiple options for where work should go. Should it go to Brad, a carbon-based human worker? Should it go to Alex, a digital worker? Who's the best? Or is it automatically going to be routed to a gig worker that could actually be digital as well, external? So there's all these options that are going to be planned. It manages across multitudes of types of digital worker and different types of automation platforms. So it's completely agnostic to who the vendor is. It doesn't matter whether it's a Blue Prism digital worker or one of our competitors' digital workers. It doesn't matter whether it's being run on a BPM platform or a non-BPM platform. There's just so many things and it's a completely different type of build than what we've ever built in Blue Prism before. And so again, there are so many positive things that probably take an hour to go through all the features and functionality that it's going to provide. And we are very excited about it. We're already starting our alpha testing now with select customers on that. And so, we're looking for release coming soon, and it's going to be an amazing product.
Great stuff, Jet. Listen, your passion for intelligent automation is amazing, and especially your passion for helping companies embrace it as a strategic capability, not just a technology. Thank you for being on the podcast today and sharing your thoughts. I wish you the very best.
All the best to you as well. And thanks so much. And anytime, Brad, anything I can do to help, and look forward to it another time.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.